Good morning, everyone. We just had a great keynote address by Professor Lynn Loo, CEO of the Global Center for Maritime Decarbonisation. Hi, Lynn. Thank you so much.
And thanks again for the invitation and the opportunity.
No, it was great, but actually, I just wanted to deepen a little bit more on what you were talking about. So I wanted to ask you, well, first of all, we keep talking about decarbonization for the maritime industry, but sometimes the road towards that end seems a bit unclear. So what would you say are the first steps for industry stakeholders in this regard?
Well, I think the first steps before anything else is really to understand the real situation on the ground, right? And so understanding the gravity of the challenge, and then figuring out what are the roles we can play both individually and as part of an organization, and then as part of the ecosystem is really important. And so I think if you talk about ship owners and ship operators, I think it's really looking at what are the near-term technical measures one can adopt to increase energy efficiency, to reduce fuel consumption. I think those are first steps. Regulations are coming down the pike. You need to do that anyway. And then it's to look at, low carbon fuels that are available today. Are there appropriate opportunities for you to adopt those? Those would be the first steps. But again, the ecosystem is very diverse, and so that's just one group of them. I would say in order to enable these things to happen, regulations need to be in place. And so regulators and policymakers also have first steps, right? And it's really to start concretely talking about carbon pricing, because carbon pricing is such an important lever to make it easier to kind of reduce the marginal cost for ship owners, ship operators to adopt these different kinds of technologies and low carbon solutions. Regulators also play an important role on a safety perspective. So if we take a long-term perspective and think about safety, I think those guidelines and regulations need to be in place for when the future fuels are ready. And then the other, I would say, segment of stakeholders would be the financiers. And I would encourage them to think about going beyond the traditional way of financing, right? We hear very often that these things are not bankable. But are there opportunities for us to spread risk so that it becomes more palatable for financial institutions to come in? Because we cannot afford to wait for fuel production to be at scale to invest in zero emissions fuel ships. We can't afford to wait for off-taker agreements to invest in fuel production facilities. All these things need to move in parallel, and so it's figuring out what the first steps are.
Right. No, that's definitely interesting because like you mentioned, it's like a puzzle or like a jigsaw. You don't know where to begin, but indeed, definitely from those steps we can move forward. And you also mentioned about bunkering corridors. How can these sort of help speed up the energy transition in the sector?
So I think, Matteo, when you say bunkering corridors, you're referring to these, what people are commonly referring to as green corridors. Right. To us at GCMD, we think of these green corridors as more G2G, so government to government concepts, because I think at the end of the day, in order for you to have a green corridor or a bunkering corridor, you need the infrastructure in place on the land side to be able to support and bring in the green fuels for the ships so that you can have a green corridor, right? So I think land infrastructure is really important. And so building up the supply chain for new fuels, building up the infrastructure associated with bunkering these new fuels are going to be really important on the land side to support a green corridor. And once you have this green corridor, then you can begin to think about how it amplifies both the local, regional, and the bigger ecosystem, right? So I think it's a cascading effect. And I think originally when we think about these corridors, it's really to aggregate fuels, because these green fuels aren't going to be available at scale initially, right? They're going to come in slowly, and so as they come in slowly, then the question is, do we spread it everywhere, or can we collect it and do meaningful trials, if you will, or do meaningful, to be able to lower the emissions of individual ships meaningfully across a corridor. And so in that case, you'd need to kind of aggregate where the fuels are, right?
Yeah, definitely. It's about the the area, what happens at sea and then what happens in land, it's definitely, infrastructure definitely plays a key role in this. And then I understand that, for example, the GCMD is piloting a lot of solutions to tackle these technical challenges that we face in energy transition. What can you tell us about these pilots?
Yeah, so I mean, I think, so I spoke about the pilots at my keynote. So I mean, there are three big ones, I would say three big buckets, and I would categorize them as, near-term solutions, mid-term solutions, and longer-term solutions. In the long-term solution bucket, we've chosen to focus on ammonia. And there, if you look across the supply chain, bunkering, how do you safely handle ammonia, is a challenge. And so we've conducted a safety study that's coming to an end. And so we're getting ready to share those results. And the idea is to use those results to go to the regulators so that we can set up a regulatory sandbox to do the actual piloting to demonstrate that you can transfer these molecules safely. Because I think once you can do that, and once you can demonstrate that you have a competency framework with which seafarers and operators can actually be trained to transfer ammonia safely, that's a missing piece, one of the missing pieces across the supply chain. And so when the fuels are ready, when the ship is ready, then this piece is ready to go. So that's sort of the idea behind the safety study. And then of course the other two pilots, one has to do with coming up with an assurance framework for the supply chain to bolster the integrity of the supply chain for drop-in green fuels. We've chosen to do this with biofuels simply because biofuels are available. And again, the idea is to, increase the transparency on how much you're buying, where you're buying it from, because that has an impact on the carbon emissions, and then ultimately the abatement potential, right? So it's really kind of to look at that supply chain, and so you're using a tracer technology to trace and track the biofuel from the source down to the fuel purchaser when you put it into the fuel tank. And then the last project is a shipboard carbon capture, and this is a medium-term solution that we think is really important. It's one of the few technologies out there that can actually be a negative emissions technology. And so if we believe that oil and gas are going to be sticky and they're going to be around for a little bit, then we need a solution to help those ships who are going to be oil and gas to be able to decarbonize as well. And shipboard carbon capture is one of them. And so here we're doing an end-to-end pilot where we can demonstrate both capture and then storage on board and then offloading and then off-taking that CO2 to just demonstrate that you can do this on a commercial basis, right? I mean, this may be the first one, but the reason for doing this at scale and end-to-end is so that it can be replicated.
Exactly, and then hopefully you will be able to scale up and be a model that will be replicated across the industry.
Yeah, and I think underlying all our projects, what you'll see is, we're trying to be very pragmatic about the constraints and about, just the assets that are available, and just about, we don't live in a vacuum, right? We live in sort of an existing ecosystem, and so identifying what the bottlenecks are and being able to kind of de-bottleneck those bottlenecks. And so I think our position as a neutral convener is also really important. I've shown slides of who our partners are and how these partners come together. We've been able to bring together stakeholders that are nominally competitors to work together, and I think that's really, really important. And so that speaks to sort of who we are as a neutral convener, and so we can bring people together to do these kinds of meaningful pilots, because I think individually what you can do is probably a small segment of a pilot. Exactly. But if we wanted to do something from end to end, then I think you need a rich ecosystem around it. And so we've been very blessed with how we've been set up so we can bring those players together.
Yeah, no, I said it was really interesting because it's very holistic. I think you mentioned that in your presentation, the way you guys are working, and definitely it's a tricky word. It's all about collaboration.
Yes.
And Lynn, just finally, is there any message that you would like to give the sector in terms of reaching decarbonization and reducing the carbon emissions?
Yeah, I mean, I think decarbonizing shipping is really, really important because shipping plays such an integral role in the global supply chain. So we absolutely need to do it. That said, it's a big challenge simply because the green fuels are not available at scale or at cost today. And so what this means is we need to get together and work on it in a sustainable fashion. Not sustainable as in green, but sustainable as in
Lasting.
Yes, lasting fashion. And this is something that not an individual or an individual company can tackle alone. And so the more we work together, both within sector and across sector, the faster we can get there. And it's really all about, getting to the end goal. I mean, I think we debate a lot about the best pathways, but that's all in transition. At the end of the day, it's getting there.
Yeah, well, it's a commendable effort. It's great work, and I can only wish you and the Global Center for Maritime Decarbonisation the best and good luck. And we look forward to seeing what else you guys will be working on.
Thanks, Mateo.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, thanks for the opportunity.
Thank you.